chronicling the latest cannabis industry news and headlines. Welcome to the State of Cannabis, bringing you fact-based news and views and keeping listeners on the pulse of what's happening in the industry today. Advocates and analysts will join us to discuss the ongoing path to reform and legislation. Now, the State of Cannabis, with your host, Dave Inman.
Welcome to another edition of the State of Cannabis. I'm your host, Dave Inman. Today is July 1st, and while most of you are preparing to celebrate this weekend, our friends on the left coast go to raise their pipes for the first time legally. Oregonians, we salute you, and we're jealous. Today on our show, we have author, activist, smuggler, and more recently, the founder of the Silver Tour, a nonprofit that assists the elderly with cannabis use and understanding. Please welcome Robert Platshorn. Robert, welcome.
Thank you for having me on.
You know, the thanks are all ours, to have you on the show. You've had a wild ride of a life, to say the least. For those of you that may not know the name Robert Platshorn, you spent 30 years in prison for a nonviolent offense, the longest nonviolent stint in American history. Tell us about that.
Tell you about 30 years in prison?
The summarization, of course, but it would the start and getting in there,
I was really in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Black Tuna case, we were called by the government anyway, the Black Tuna Gang. I actually had never heard that name until I saw it in the newspapers when we were indicted. But in any case, it was the first joint effort of the FBI and DEA. The DEA had been working through customs. The DEA was chartered as a non-arrest agency because in their previous life as the BND, they were shut down because of corruption. And it was felt if they couldn't arrest, then perhaps they wouldn't be corrupt. So they always needed a partner. And for the most part, along the East Coast and even out on the West Coast, it was the Coast Guard. And they really didn't use the same methods or the same ethics. And the Coast Guard wasn't really too happy with them. At the same time, the Carter administration was talking fairly openly about disbanding the DEA. The FBI at the same time was it was the end of the Cold War, and they were no longer in the find a communist under every rug business. Their task at the time, their official tasking, was to stop industrial espionage. That really wasn't too sexy, and it looked like they were going to downsize the FBI. So FBI and
how did you grab their attention? Because you had their attention like no other at the time.
They were looking for a victim. They had started an operation called Operation Banco, and the purpose of the operation was to trace the flow of hundreds of millions of dollars every month from Miami to Colombia. The Federal Reserve Bank down here had more cash going through it than the one in New York City. And at that time, it was pretty much all pot money. Everybody in South Florida was in the pot business at one level or another, whether they were bringing in one bale in a boat from their fishing trip or bringing in airplanes and ships. It was a monster business.
Was it really 500 tons?
No.
So that was a bit of a stretch for what actually happened, but they definitely wanted to pin as much on you as they possibly could. But between you and your partner, it was 108 years. Is that right?
Yeah, just between the two of us, there was a third partner. You could toss on another 35 and 4 or 5 more defendants that averaged 7 to 10. So we're talking about 200 years. But Operation Banco, when they finally discovered the main banking connection between Miami and Colombia, they also found out that it was controlled by a Cuban group that worked for the CIA. And they caught the biggest banker of them all and found that they couldn't really prosecute him. They let him take a guilty plea for a year suspended sentence. Now, this is the guy that they were looking for, but now they got no case. In the course of investigating banks, they came across our name a couple of times, but lots of other names too. And probably the first person I had bought a load from before we became smugglers had already turned government informant and given him our name. And so our name came up a second time in the bank investigations, and it came up a third time after we had retired, and someone we had helped get into the business got caught and claimed he was working for us. So 3 strikes and you're out. We became the most likely case. None of us had ever been in trouble before, had a criminal record. So we were really easy fish to spear. And they overblew the case to a degree that no one had ever seen. It was the first time they used the Kingpin statute, 848, continuing criminal enterprise, to prosecute a marijuana prosecution. Prior to that, the use of the Kingpin statute and the RICO statute, we got a couple of those too, just thrown in for good measure. The most we really should have been facing was about a 5-year sentence back in those days. And as first offenders, it was parolable. And with any luck, we'd have only gotten 3 and been out in 1. Instead, I got a 64-year sentence and was out in a quick 30. Or not such
64 years for a nonviolent offense. I mean, it boggles the mind. And you know, you're one of the few people that I've talked to that's, well, obviously one of the few people that I've ever talked to that's been in prison for 30 years. Let me ask you this one question. Would you do it again?
Oh, hell no.
Probably a little bit more low key this time around, huh?
I'll tell you how low key we were. Until we were blasted in the media by the DEA and FBI, who were doing this for publicity to begin with, to justify an association that continues today. Had they not been successful, they probably, the DEA would be gone and the FBI would be doing something legitimate.
And it is okay to smoke if you smoke too, just so you know.
What are you, blind?
Well, if you hear the lighter flicking, it's for a very good reason.
Oh, I take it you can't see me?
Oh, I can see you, but
One was, one wasn't.
There you go. He's not lying. He's not lying.
No. I mean, it devastated my family. I lost both my parents while I was in prison, both my sisters. And now, just for what it did to the family, I certainly would never do that again. I thought the liability was at most 2 years on a 5-year sentence and probably less. Just bad timing. I was the scapegoat they were looking for. I understand that, and pragmatically, I understand what they did. But it's behind me now, and I don't look back. I enjoy what I do every time I help to pass a decrim or get somebody to put a legalization bill on the ballot somewhere or bring it up to the legislature. Makes me feel pretty good. You know, the first bill filed in Florida 4 years ago was the one I convinced the now Senator Clemens to put in. And I got to give him a lot of credit. They called him the stoner senator, and I mean, they ridiculed him, and he stuck to his guns. And the second year, he actually had a co-signer on the bill. And the third year he put it in, he had a half a dozen co-sponsors on the bill. And that led to the Kathy Jordan medical marijuana bill, which, like all the previous ones, the Republicans just refused to bring up in committee. The bills were there. They were sent up to committee, but not one was ever heard because the Republican-controlled legislature wasn't interested. And that led us to Amendment 2 to try and pass it without the legislature. Now, in case you don't know, we've actually got 3 bills that are sitting up in the legislature, and 2 of them are Republican. Big change in the 4 years that I've been at it here in Florida, and of course in other states too. I've been in half the states that have had things on the ballot in the last few years, including Arizona.
Excellent. Well, next time you're in Arizona, we'll definitely have to get together and have a cup of coffee.
Okay.
And you know how I feel about cannabis. I think that it should just be simply like coffee. I mean, I yearn for the time that it's no longer special. And it just simply is. And, the people that use it, they don't wind up throwing so much away, yourself obviously included, the young college kid that is on scholarship and just happens to, smoke a joint for the first time sometimes and lose their scholarship. And they have a felony on their record. And then all of a sudden they no longer can, earn the type of money that they could have with a college degree and no felony. It's those devastations that really I want to see this as just simply a normal thing. Yeah. We have to take a quick break. When we get back, Robert Platshorn. Thank you. We'll be right back.
Stay tuned for more State of Cannabis, only on CannabisRadio.com when we return.
Ganjapreneur.com, your guide to the cannabis business world. Ganjapreneur.com is a comprehensive resource for cannabis professionals and entrepreneurs. Download the Ganjapreneur app on your smartphone or tablet to catch up on cannabis industry news, scroll through our daily job listings, and learn about successful cannabis companies, executives, and investors. Ganjapreneur.com, helping Ganjapreneurs grow.
The smoke is rising, and the next crop of podcasts devoted to cannabis providers and enthusiasts are ready to be harvested. Welcome to the Cannabis Radio Network, founded by respected rainmakers who have been producing award-winning podcasts for over a decade. Industry headlines, business updates, medical reports, marketing, and e-commerce education rolled up perfectly for your consumption. Let's grow together. The Cannabis Radio Network. CannabisRadio.com. Educator, author, and advocate Dr. Mitch Earlywine is here to tackle the burning issues.
And I'm here to clear up the myths about cannabis and burn them away with science.
CannabisRadio.com presents a no-holds-barred platform that seeks to redefine and revolutionize the entire scope of the cannabis culture while opening the door for more to join the cannabis crusade.
Dr. Kevin Hill.
You can't ignore the fact that, like alcohol, most people who use don't have a problem. So I think that you need to think about policy in that way while educating people properly about marijuana. I think that's the way to go.
Burning Issues, only on CannabisRadio.com. Chronicling the latest cannabis industry news and headlines. Welcome back to the State of Cannabis, only on CannabisRadio.com. Once again, here's Dave Inman.
Welcome back to the State of Cannabis. I'm your host, Dave Inman. With us tonight, we have Robert Platshorn, author, activist, and a stalwart champion of the cannabis cause. Robert, welcome to the show. Earlier, we were talking about, obviously this insane amount of time that you spent in jail for simply having a plant and bringing it to the U.S. And, it's one of those things that's very difficult to imagine in a normal society that we can be punished to this kind of degree for something so mundane. And, the
punishment doesn't end there. In this state and a lot of other states, if you've got a drug conviction, you can't get a license to cut hair, sell real estate, or even sell used cars. There's nothing much left for a lot of people who come out of prison other than flipping burgers or selling phony stocks over the telephone.
Yeah, not everybody can be a wolf of Wall Street, right?
Yeah, I was fortunate. When I came out, High Times commissioned me to write some articles. I wrote some stuff for the New York Times and the other magazines. As you know, it doesn't pay a lot of money, but it helped me teach myself how to use a computer and finish my memoir, Black Tuna Diaries. Plus, I'm an old pitchman. I worked on the boardwalk with Ron Popeil. I made infomercials before Ron Popeil ever heard the word, and I was the one who encouraged him to do it in the first place. So I was able to earn a living, and I was also fortunate. I had a wife and a place to live. Most people who get out of prison are not in that good a position, and so I regard myself as being very fortunate.
And now you're doing something, honestly, that I regard as magical. You're the founder of the Silver Tour. And the Silver Tour, from what I understand, you encourage, or educate elderly on the use and uses of cannabis. Tell us about the Silver Tour.
I was doing a lot of work to try and help passage of Prop 19. And I believed firmly that if legalization had passed, of course, we'd be much further down the road. The fact that it didn't only strengthened our enemies. So I was really disappointed that it didn't pass, and I took a look at the exit polls. I saw, and this was a by-election, so the only people who voted were seniors and Latinos. I saw that it was seniors and seniors alone that defeated Prop 19. The campaign against Prop 19 was financed by the beer lobby, and all they did was try and scare seniors. I was surprised that seniors in California had little or no knowledge of the value of medical marijuana. I mean, after all, they had it for 15 years already. So I started the Silver Tour. I figured I'm an old pitchman. If anybody can talk to seniors, I'm a senior old pitchman. And if I don't do it, nobody will. I was really sad to look around and see that there wasn't a single organization in the entire country that was doing anything to actually reach out to the people who needed to be educated. Nobody was using the media, and it was something I had been doing for years with infomercials and working in radio and TV. And I started the Silver Tour. The idea was to begin by going to big senior communities with a clubhouse, and we'd have an audience of 100 or 200, or even some of them were 400, and we'd put on a big show. I would bring a doctor and a nurse. I would have several local patients who were willing to get up and talk about their success with cannabis medicine. I knew the senior objections, and I also knew this was my generation. I mean, we invented marijuana as it's known today. So, with seniors, sometimes it's very, very easy. All you got to do is look them in the face and say, look, in my state, at least 50% of the seniors are on Ambien or Lunesta in order to sleep. And if you've ever seen that commercial with the butterfly, they spend the entire 60 seconds talking about the dangers. You can walk, talk, eat, or drive a car in your sleep because it doesn't put you to sleep. It puts you in a fugue state. There's no REM sleep. You don't wake up, if you've gone to sleep at all, feeling rested. And they warn you that if you're subject to depression, of course, all seniors seem to be subject to depression, that it will make it worse. And they tell you that in some cases, your tongue will swell up and you'll die. You look at the seniors dead in the eye and say, look, you remember what it was like when you were back in college, how nice it felt to take a toke or two, get a great night's sleep, have good dreams, and wake up feeling good in the morning. End of story. You got them. Of course, it doesn't hurt to talk about cancer and Alzheimer's and Crohn's disease.
It's tough to tell them that it's a panacea. A lot of times it sounds too good to be true. And people just don't understand, the word adaptogen, and it's important, having that word in our vocabulary moving forward, that we have things that can kind of just work their way through their body and see what ails you.
We actually don't have a hard time selling it as a panacea, because if you do it right and you start with explaining very briefly that we've got an endocannabinoid system and more cannabis receptors than anything else in your body. And then a doctor gets up and talks about all the things it could be good for. You know, and if you've seen my TV show, Should Grandma Smoke Pot, I've got people like Dr. Andrew Weil, I've got Bob Melamede, Dr. Melamede, and, what's his name from San Fran General, head of oncology, Abrams. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
We had Donald Abrams, and, of course, the father of them all from Harvard, Lester Grinspoon.
He just had a birthday recently.
I know. You know, the nicest thing that ever happened to me, and certainly since I'm out of prison, aside from coming home to my wife, he called me. Dr. Lester Grinspoon called me. Now, understand, back when I was on trial in 1979, the Coptics were on trial at the same time, and he was a witness for them, and he had just written the first book by an American physician about the benefits of cannabis. And, you know, they wanted to put him in a mental institution. They tried everything to discredit him, and his career was to some degree ruined. He never got full professorship. He stayed an associate professor. But he stuck to his guns, and today he's a hero. But he called me up, and he said, you know, I saw the article in the Wall Street Journal about the Silver Tour, and he said, I saw you on the Daily Show. He said, wow, you know, you're my hero. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. I said, you got that all backwards. I said, you're my hero.
Wow, that's an amazing thing to hear from a guy like Lester Grinspoon. And you know, in truth, you are a hero. You're helping people in the prime of their life and to enjoy their life to the fullest. We got to take a quick break, folks. When we get back, Robert Platshorn. We'll be right back with you, folks.
Stay tuned for more State of Cannabis, only on CannabisRadio.com when we return. InternetMarketingNinjas.com is the online dojo of the highly trained and skilled Internet Marketing Ninjas. Disavow documents, reconsideration requests, panda and pay-win penalties. Let our superior SEO ninjas confront all of your link-related issues. The Internet Marketing Ninjas are equipped to master any marketing exercise, content creation, authorship, link building, PPC, and more. Plus, build more buzz for your brand with our social media marketing strategies. Discover all that the Internet Marketing Ninjas can do for you. Visit the online dojo now at InternetMarketingNinjas.com.
Doc Rob, the concierge for better living.
Cannabis is just one of the many great plants that we have on this planet called Earth that we can use consciously and intelligently to improve our well-being.
Take a real, raw, inside look at healthier living while sharing great ideas and improvements for a better quality of life.
Learning to live and live well is a lifelong process. This is a journey. You could be 80 years old or 8 years old. You can still learn something that's going to make tomorrow a little bit healthier, a little bit easier, a little bit happier, a little bit better.
The concierge for better living with Doc Rob. Only on CannabisRadio.com.
Ignite the conversation on some trending topics along the Cannabis Radio social media network. Join our crew of thousands on our Cannabis Radio page on Facebook or at Canna Radio, CANNA Radio on Twitter. Plus, look for our Facebook and Google Plus pages for all of our original programs and connect with Dr. Dina, Kyle Cushman, Dr. Mitch Earlywine, Nurse Heather, Doc Rob, the hosts of Ganjapreneur, and more. Connect with the growing Cannabis Radio social crusade at Canna Radio on Twitter or search for Cannabis Radio on Facebook, Google Plus, and Instagram and grow with us.
Chronicling the latest cannabis industry news and headlines. Welcome back to the State of Cannabis, only on CannabisRadio.com. Once again, here's Dave Inman.
Welcome to the State of Cannabis. I'm your host, Dave Inman. We've been talking with Robert Platshorn, author, activist, smuggler, and true humanitarian and teaching the elderly the benefits of cannabis. Robert, welcome to the show. Let's dive back into you're in Florida right now, and there's been a lot of movement. There's 3 initiatives currently weaving their way up the ladder. Tell us about those.
There's 2 Republican initiatives that will give us something akin to real medical marijuana. And there is one Democratic initiative, once again, the Kathy Jordan medical marijuana bill. Kathy, of course, is the longest living ALS patient in the country, and she had been given a year to live 28 years ago. But the difference is cannabis. At present, we actually have a medical marijuana law. It's a Charlotte's Web law with little or no THC. It's not likely to help many of the kids who really need it desperately for Dravet's epilepsy, very severe epilepsy. And it's also not likely to ever be available. They're no closer now than they were a year ago to making the regulations, licensing growers, and they haven't had one single application from a grower who will be forced to grow 30,000 pounds but won't have 30 customers. So it really was disingenuous, just like it was in almost every other southern state that rushed to pass the Charlotte's Web bill in order to block real medical marijuana. And that's what happened in Florida as well. And it's really a very cruel joke on the families of these children who will lose their brain capacity and die because they have 50 to 200 seizures a day and can't survive it.
And for those of you that may not know, currently the U.S. has a patent on cannabinoids as a neuroprotectant and antioxidant. So let that ring a little bit true with what Robert just said about how, if you have a neuro condition and you have a substance that really it's very easy to grow and have and can actually benefit your mind, and the government actually has a patent for this medicine. Robert, how have you been involved in any of the legislature currently moving forward in Florida?
4 years ago, I convinced Representative Jeff Clemens, now Senator Clemens, to put the first bill in. He was ridiculed, called a stoner, but he persisted, and the following year we had more support. In the third year, we had a lot of support. And I've been involved in the petition drive since it began under the name of Puff'em before it became United for Care. I was out in the hot sun collecting petitions virtually as soon as I got out of prison. I've been involved in most of the campaigns and legislation passed here in Florida. But we're coming up on a very, very watershed year in 2016. We really have a chance to end the prohibition of cannabis. There are a tremendous number of states who are going to try to pass full legalization. The federal government realizes they've got to do something. But there's another group that knows this is coming, and that's the anti-marijuana people. The private prisons, big pharma, the alcohol industry, and even the oil industry.
And our religious leaders.
The religious leaders are kind of not very vocal right now, and we did pick up the most important group of religious leaders, and that was the black community. The black community was very staunchly anti-marijuana, the black churches. And they finally realized that it was mostly black men and black women who were being victimized by the marijuana laws and disadvantaged. So in the last year and a half, the black church establishments have come to support legalization and end the incarceration of so many black men.
It's definitely indicative, that what they see and have known really throughout their history that it's been basically a stigma that they bear more so than any of the other colors out there. The blacks and Mexicans and anybody of color seems to be more prone to having a police stop and search and find something on them, and they go to jail for cannabis, as opposed to white gentlemen. I wanted to also talk about you have a couple of books. You while in prison, you wrote
Black Tuna Diaries.
You wrote the Black Tuna Diaries, and that actually turned into a documentary, the Square Grouper, right?
Well, it inspired the documentary. The documentary just covers the arrests and the trial and the sensationalism, and it does a great job of talking to everybody involved, from the smugglers to the lawyers and the prosecutors. And it's a terrific movie. It was on Showtime for a year, called Square Grouper. But Black Tuna Diaries is a memoir. It's not only actual smuggling stories, which are not in the movie, but my years as a pitchman on the Atlantic City boardwalk, my time as a bullfighter in Spain. And, I started the first speed reading schools in Europe. I had schools in England, Holland, Germany when I was 24 years old. And it's a memoir. It covers a lot of interesting things I did when I got into the infomercial business, and how I got into the pot business, and what brought me in to begin with, and how I established the first Colombian connection and brought in just about 90% of the Santa Marta gold that ever hit this country. And as you should know, the Santa Marta gold was the mother strain for not only most of the medical strains grown today, but most of the really great sativa hybrids all come out of Santa Marta gold. It was a legend. And there wasn't that much of it grown, and I brought most of it in. Me and my partners, and we brought it in by plane, and we brought it in by boat. Nowhere near the 3 or 4 million pounds we were accused of. In fact, the real figure, and every pound of it is in the book, and it talks about how much each plane and each boat, but it was under 100,000 pounds, not 4 million pounds.
Still a remarkable haul for the time.
Yeah, and when you think of it in terms of today's prices, those are gigantic amounts. I mean, today a pound or 10 pounds represents a lot of money. Back in those days, the wholesale, somebody who'd come to us and buy 500 or 1,000 pounds, he paid about $3.50 a pound, which was higher than anything else around, but it was so much better that they'd rather pay that and come back to wherever they were, the universities and cities like New York and Chicago, and have a really great product. And to put an old lie to bed about today's marijuana being so much stronger, Santa Marta Gold and Thai Stick and the good Hawaiians that were grown, they all tested out between 14 up to 18%. Santa Marta Gold averaged over 16%. So that's right up there with top shelf today. That's one of the big things the no marijuana crowd tries to push, that it's so much stronger today, and it really isn't. It's just another one of their lies.
And even if it was stronger, you hit a certain plateau and you just kind of stop. You're like, well, I'm good now. It's not as if it's like some cocaine that you did some that was stepped on, and then you did some that wasn't, and it was profoundly different. You take a couple and you stop.
Yeah, but that is a little harder to sell. However, what's happening right now is all of those factors, the private prisons, big pharma, the alcohol industry, are pooling their money, and they've already put together millions in order to try to slow down, stop, and maybe even reverse the things we've worked so hard for in the last 5 years.
And we're not going to let them with guys like you. Again, the elderly, they're the voting bloc, and what you're doing is just an amazing thing. I mean, that's how we corral these people from trying to push their agendas. We educate these people, and that's exactly what you're doing.
What's got to be done, and there's nobody else around who seems to want to do it. There's never been a national education campaign having to do with cannabis, not by any organization. I've made a deal to run 1,000 one-minute radio messages a week on all of the best news talk stations from one end of the country all the way to the other. Most of them are owned or controlled by one company. And I've got to deal with them to run 1,000 national 60-second spots a week for $5,000 a week. Do you realize?
So we need to raise $5,000 is what you're saying. We need to raise $5,000 a week to make sure that these ads are airing. And how are we going to get people to donate that money? Do you have it on your website? Is that silvertour.com?
The silvertour.org.
The silvertour.org.
They'll land on the same place.
Excellent.
There's a new site going up next week. We're taking the old one down, and the whole thing will be devoted to this 1-year radio campaign. And the messages will be the ones that will counter what the other side already has planned. Messages like, did you know, according to the National Safety Transportation Board, states with medical or legal marijuana have not seen an increase in road accidents. In fact, traffic fatalities in states like Colorado are down by 50%. Did you know, according to the DEA and ONDC, states with medical marijuana have not seen an increase in teen use. In fact, it's gone down significantly in states like Colorado. Did you know, a recent study in Florida concluded that not only will cannabis delay the onset of Alzheimer's, it may actually prevent it. According to Dr. Gary Wank at Ohio State University, people who use cannabis do not get Alzheimer's at the same rate as those who don't. Those are the kind of messages, and it stops the other side dead in their tracks for what really amounts to pennies. And because we've got a full minute, we'll be able to do it like NPR does, so that companies and people in our industry who will sponsor a week at a time will actually get 2 commercials out of every minute. Because like NPR will say, this is Cannabis Facts from the Silver Tour, brought to you by Magical Butter.
Perfect.
Fusion to America at magicalbutter.com. And at the end, it says, we'd like to thank our supporters, Magical Butter, blah, 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 blah. So for $5,000 a week, they'll actually get 2,000 national name exposures, and it'll be associated with a message that they can be proud of and that will grow our industry.
I definitely want to make sure that we get that shared up. So anybody that hears about the Silver Tour, I'll make sure and put it up on my pages and share that around. Let's try and get some money in the coffers on this. We are at the end game, and it's our game to win or lose. And it's these types of utilities that we have in front of us that we can use and really start tipping the scale. There's no reason that we should lose any more ground. All we have to do is educate and keep people moving forward. We got to keep kicking the cannabis can down the road. And Robert, it's guys like you that are making a momentum. Sir, thank you for the sacrifice that you made. I wish you hadn't made it. I wish you. Yeah, I'm sure it was, and I wish that nobody goes to jail for a plant. And the intent of all of this is to stop that from happening anymore. Robert, thank you so much for your time. It's been a wonderful discussion. One other thing we didn't get to touch on, your new book. What is your new book called?
New book is called Greed and Evil.
Greed and evil.
It's the real backstory of where the money comes from for the anti-marijuana campaigns, where organizations like Drug Free America Foundation get their money from the 3 biggest opiate producers in the whole world. It's the inside story on private prisons and a big section on ALEC, the American Legislative and Economic Commission, who has been writing virtually all of our criminal statutes for the past 20 years to benefit their corporate members.
And where can we get a copy of these books? Where can we buy these?
Greedandevil.com, both books. Both books are also up on the Silver Tour website or BlackTunaDiaries.com. There Excellent. You can get a preview of Black Tuna Diaries, which is in its 7th printing. And
amazing.
It got great reviews, and everybody says it's just one of the most enjoyable reads. Even the prison stories are not dark and depressing. A lot of funny things happen in prison. And I didn't write this book to get sympathy or depress anyone. And it's really a very lively read.
I can't wait to read them both. And, next time you're in Arizona, we're like I said, we'll have to get together and have that cup of coffee. You've been with the State of Cannabis, Robert Platshorn. We'll see you on the flip side, folks. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me on. It's been a joy and a pleasure.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Robert.
The opinions expressed on this CannabisRadio.com program are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of CannabisRadio.com. Any rebroadcast or redistribution without proper consent of CannabisRadio.com is prohibited.